Hey fam, welcome back in. Appreciate you rocking with us. It is week 11. The fantasy playoffs are right around the corner. We have 4 teams on bye. It's time to lock in. We are here to help you out. Going to be hitting you with our week 11 running back rankings. Going to go over our top 24. So without further ado, Kev, let's dive right in. Hit the folks with our top 12 running backs for this week. They are as follows. Have CMC at the top, followed by Saquon Barkley, Joe Mixon, Devon Achane, Kyren Williams, Bijan Robinson, Derrick Henry, Jahmyr Gibbs, Breece Hall, Alvin Kamara, Kenneth Walker III, and Jonathan Taylor wrapping up our top 12. So, Kev, among these top 12 guys, obviously we're starting, if you have any of these guys, we're getting plugged in. But is there anyone that you want to hit on and let the folks know about for week 11?
Yeah, I want to talk about a few of these situations. Really quickly, I just wanted to mention CMC and how he fared in his first game of 2024. While it wasn't your typical CMC production, he did 90% of the rush attempts and an impressive 19% target share while playing 89% of snaps. So it's pretty safe to say that CMC is fully back. It is a massive gain for people who weathered the storm. Now he gets a matchup against the Seahawks defense that's allowed the 10th most PPR points. So love to see that. I know there's a lot of question marks and concerns about him heading into last week, how they were going to utilize them. Was going to be like a 50-50 split or something like that to kind of ease them back in, but that has quickly been erased. So next up is Joe Mixon. Mixon's role continues to be among the best in the league. He's handling over 78% of the rush attempts and seeing a good, not great, 10.7% target share. He also ranks 7th in red zone touches, and his 8 touchdowns are the 4th most, even though he has missed 3 games. He is the RB2 in fantasy points per game and now gets a tremendous matchup against the Cowboys. Cowboys have allowed the 12th most rushing yards, 3rd most touchdowns, and the 10th most receiving yards to running backs. Mixon is a locked-in top 5 running back this week. Next up is Kenneth Walker. The Seahawks are fresh off their bye and draw a matchup against the 49ers. This is the second time these two have faced each other. The last time Walker totaled 69 total yards with 22 total touches and scored 21 fantasy points. What propelled him was his 8 receptions he hauled in. Walker has been as advertised this season. He averages 14 carries and nearly 5 targets per game with a 70% opportunity share. That ranks top 12 among all running backs. His 19.1 fantasy points per game is a career high. And as long as he continues to see this kind of work in the passing game, he figures to be in the mix for a top 5 finish rest of season. Now, this week, the 49ers are a little bit more of a middle-of-the-road matchup for Walker. They have allowed the 8th fewest rushing yards and a 3.89 yards per carry. However, they have allowed the 8th most rushing touchdowns and the 8th most receptions and receiving yards and the 9th most receiving touchdowns on the season. Overall, they have allowed the 14th most PPR points to position. So that why this isn't a smash spot for Kenneth Walker by any means. As long as he continues to see the pass catching work that he has been, he still is a strong RB1 play this week.
Nice bounce back week for some of these top running backs. You already touched on Mixon. Obviously, he struggled the last time we saw him out, but I think even Kyren Williams gets back on track, Breece Hall. But the other guy I just want to touch on really quickly was Jonathan Taylor. Gets a matchup against the Jets, who are really starting to struggle just across the board, frankly, but specifically against the run. Over the past 3 weeks, they've allowed the 7th most fantasy points per game in the position. Jonathan Taylor coming off of his 4th 100-yard rushing game of the year, which doesn't sound like that great, but we have to remember he missed 3 weeks as well. So Jonathan Taylor is a really nice start here as well. But let's go ahead and move into the RB2s for the week. Kicking things off at the top is going to be Josh Jacobs at 13, followed by Kareem Hunt, David Montgomery, Chase Brown, James Cook, Aaron Jones, DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins, Nick Chubb, Ramondre Stevenson, Brian Robinson. Obviously, we have to wait and see what happens with him. And then Tony Pollard at RB24. Kev, same deal here. What do you want the folks to know about among the RB2 ranks for this week?
Yeah, I really wanted to get Josh Jacobs inside my top 12. Just couldn't quite get there. Just so many good running backs at the top right now. Really fun fact. We actually have 16 running backs that are averaging over 16 fantasy points per game, where we only have 8 wide receivers. That's how bad it has been for wide receivers this year. But anyways, when it comes to Josh Jacobs, this hasn't been a bad year for Josh Jacobs, but it really hasn't been what we thought it would be either, as he only ranks 21st in opportunity share. Remember, heading into the year, we thought he was going to kind of be the workhorse back in this backfield. This really hasn't kind of been the case. But he is averaging 17 carries per game, which is really nice. But he's only seen more than 3 targets twice all year, and that is the biggest problem because the 8% target share ranks 30th, and he only has 4 touchdowns, which ranks 22nd, which has led him to being the RB20 in fantasy points per game. However, the tides may be shifting a little bit as those 4 touchdowns, he's actually scored them all over the last 5 weeks. So Hopefully, we're starting to see a little bit of a shift here for Josh Jacobs. But after the Week 10 bye, the Packers get a great matchup against the Bears, who appear to be crumbling. They just fired their offensive coordinator, which that could be argued as a good thing. But either way, their run defense has suffered the same fate. Over the last 6 weeks, the Bears have allowed 142 rushing yards per game and 4 touchdowns to running backs. They have also allowed an explosive run on 6.4% of carries, which ranks 7th highest in the league. They also have a stuff rate of just 34%, which is the 3rd lowest rate in the league. And this game sets up really nicely for Jacobs to make a strong RB2 play this week with RB1 upside. Next up is Kareem Hunt. Prior to last week's game against the Broncos, Hunt had been exclusively used as a grinder between the tackles back. In the 5 games prior to last week, he had only seen 8 total targets. However, that all changed when he was targeted 10 times. He hauled in 7 of them for 80 yards and finishing with 17 PPR points. This week, though, Hunt gets a great matchup against the Bills that have allowed the 10th most rushing yards, but have only allowed 5 rushing touchdowns, which is the 10th fewest in the league. Where they have been really gashed, though, has been by pass catching running backs. They have allowed 545 receiving yards and 5 receiving touchdowns, with both lead the league right now. Overall, the Bills have allowed the 2nd most PPR points to running backs, making Hunt a really strong play. Assuming he can stay involved in the passing game, I think that this sets up to be a really nice week for him. Though I do want to note that Isaiah Pacheco was designated to return today, to return to practice starting on Wednesday. But I kind of think he probably misses this week, but there is the chance, because it is surprising that they already, before the practice even started, that they've already designated him to return. So it's possible he could return this week. I don't see it. I think it's a much better shot he returns week 12 against Carolina. Remember, it doesn't really matter if the Chiefs win or lose this game. They are 9-0 at this point. They have a 2-game lead on everybody, and they pretty much hold tiebreakers over every team, in the AFC right now. So at least all the ones that matter. So I don't think they rush Pacheco back. I think you should feel pretty confident Kareem Hunt being able to play this week without Isaiah Pacheco. But I do think once he does come back, I think it's going to be Pacheco that takes over that early down work, and you see Kareem Hunt slide into more of a 3rd down role where he'll see some drives here and there. I think that's what's going to happen here with this backfield. But next up is Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones really should have smashed last week against a woeful Jags defense, but Sam Darnold threw 3 interceptions. And Aaron Jones also exited with an injury. However, he did return for the final couple drives to secure the win. Overall, he finished with over 100 total yards, but failed to find the end zone. Aaron Jones has been a reliable source of fantasy production this year, scoring 11 or more PPR points in every game but 2 this season. But he hasn't shown much of a ceiling this year. He's only scored more than 18 PPR points twice this year. He's currently the RB18 in fantasy points per game, and now gets a matchup against the Titans, who have allowed the 17th most PPR points in position. The Packers are nearly 6-point favorites of making Aaron Jones a decent RB2 play this week. Next up is Chase Brown. Chase Brown, since taking over as the lead back, has been a DAWG dog. He has scored 26 and 22 points at back-to-back games and has now scored a touchdown in 6 of his last 7 games. He's been their absolute workhorse. He handled 40 of the 47 possible rush attempts last week and saw a 16% target share. Last week was a really tough matchup. He faces an even tougher matchup this week. It's a Chargers defense that has been even better than what the Ravens were. The Chargers have allowed the 3rd fewest PPR points in position and are the only team that has allowed 1 rushing touchdown all year. However, with the incredible workload and usage of the passing game, Brown should be a reliable, safe bet as at least a middling RB2 this week against the Chargers. Next up on the other side of that game is J.K. Dobbins. Let's talk about Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins' situation here for a second. While Dobbins has been operating as the overwhelming lead back in Gus Edwards' absence, that all changed last week. It should be noted, though, for context purposes, the Chargers pretty much handled the Titans with ease, which could have affected some of the usage in the game. Either way, Dobbins led the team in carries, 15-10 for Edwards, and he was the preferred pass-catching back, running 15 of 23 routes, while Edwards only saw 2 routes. Well, Dobbins is still the clear RB1 to own here. Dobbins is still a strong play this week against a Bengals defense that's allowed the 18th most rushing yards and the 6th most rushing touchdowns. This week, Dobbins should be more of a low-end RB2. And then Nick Chubb, finally somebody that I can talk about here that's coming back from injury. Nick Chubb has, been pretty much dog shit. He's averaging 6.6 fantasy points per game, is 2.7 yards per carry, ranked 74th, and he's only seeing a 4% target share. Though, in his defense, 2 of the 3 matchups were terrible for Nick Chubb. This week, that all changes as he takes on a Saints defense that has allowed the 6th most rushing yards, 2nd most touchdowns, and the 4th most PPR points, making Chubb one of the better flex options this week. Lastly, let's hit on DeAndre Swift really quickly. Continue to see one of the best workloads for all running backs. This team as a whole has been awful. Some of that could change as the Bears finally move off from Shane Waldron. He was one of the worst OCs in the league. Should have been fired a long time ago. One thing that really won't change, though, is how bad their offensive line has been. Caleb Williams has been sacked 15 times over the last 2 games alone. Swift was seeing a really healthy 5 targets per game through his first 6 games. However, he has seen that drop to just 2.3 targets per game since that point. If the Bears can figure things out on the offensive side of the ball and get Swift more involved in the passing game, we could see Swift be at least an RB2 this week against a Packers defense that has allowed the 16th most PPR points. But if he doesn't, I don't have great expectations for DeAndre Swift this week because this just isn't a really good matchup against the Packers.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add there. Someone I wanted to mention that I'm lower on this week is going to be Travis Etienne. Even if Tank Bigsby misses this one, which seems like a possibility after his early exit with that ankle injury, there's just not a situation where I want to plug Etienne in. The Lions are allowing the 6th fewest half PPR points per game to the position. I know you are going to mention Najee Harris. He was someone who was banged up. I think you could potentially look to Jaylen Warren if you would have to throw him into your RB2 spot or the flex, especially with the Ravens have been really good against the run, but somewhere they have struggled has been in the pass catching game against running backs. They are allowing the 3rd most yards to running backs through the air. So that is a situation where you could look there. And then if for whatever reason, if you had to dig down real deep or maybe you're in a deeper league, I think you potentially look at plugging in somebody like Jaylen Wright, who's starting to see more run, and then going up in this matchup against the Raiders where they are 7.5-point favorites. You could do worse if you had to throw in someone as like a hope and a prayer. And I think it's, you could look at Jaylen Wright as someone as like a long shot to find the end zone in this game. And maybe he ends up getting more run toward the second half and, 3rd, 4th quarters. So those would be the guys that I would be looking at outside of the top 24.
There are some RB3s this week that would typically be more RB2s for starters. I definitely agree with you with Najee Harris. I'd have him outside of my top 24. Next up is Raheem Mostert. This is actually a great matchup, but this backfield has turned into a 3-way committee. While Etienne is the clear RB1, Mostert and Jaylen Warren have split the remaining touches. That makes Mostert a risky RB3 play, even though this is a terrific matchup against the Raiders. Tony Pollard, last week against the Chargers, we finally saw the split we heard about all offseason between Pollard and Tajay Spears. Pollard received 9 carries to 7 to Spears. Both ran 42% of the routes, and Pollard received 1 more target. This is what we're going to see moving forward. This would be a big downgrade for Tony Pollard. So as he's seen roughly 70% of the opportunity shares before this week. This week, though, is a tough matchup against the Vikings, who have allowed the 4th fewest PPR points to the position. And then lastly, Audric Estime, depending on game script, Estime could be a decent play this week as he took over as the team's lead back. He yielded 14 of his possible 23 rush attempts, but he only ran 3 routes. He played 45% of the snaps and to 30% of the snaps to Javonte. Now, I will also mention, it wasn't like Javonte ran a bunch of routes either. He only ran 8 routes, so it wasn't like there was a lot there. They didn't really utilize the running backs in that way. They weren't running a lot of routes out there. So I do think Audric Estime is a pretty sneaky play. This isn't a bad matchup against the Falcons. Falcons are more middle of the road against running backs this year. So it is risky because it could always flip back. You might want to see a little bit more, hard evidence that this is going to be something we continue to see. Though I will say before last week, we did have Sean Payton come out and so they want to get much more of an extended look on Audric Estime. And that's kind of appears what he did. And he did look like the better running back of the two. And lastly, Gus Edwards against Cincinnati. You might be able to look there. He did get 10 carries last week. I wasn't impressed with Gus Edwards. He went down with an injury. So we'll see on that. But, if you're desperate, you could always look there as well.
That is going to wrap it up. Appreciate you rocking with us. Any questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments below. Please be sure to hit us with a like and a sub as well. And we'll also be going live on Wednesday night to answer all of your start, sit, trade, waiver questions, anything else you guys have. So be sure to join us around 10:30 Eastern right here on the YouTube channel on Wednesday night. And we'll talk to you all soon.